Hey there, and welcome to Undoing We, Divorce and Life Conversations on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, radio, podcast, and TV. I'm your host, Mardi Winder Adams. I'm a divorce coach, a mediator, and someone who's been through exactly what you're going through. This show is all about helping you get through the tough stuff, the overwhelm of divorce, the what now moments, and the messiness of trying to rebuild your life. We're going to talk about real life challenges, share expert advice, and give you practical tools you can use to move forward with your life. Are you ready to start shifting from we to me? Grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Hello, I am so happy that you are here joining me today because I have one of those fun guests that I just really enjoyed connecting with, but somebody who also has a really informed, experienced, and unique perspective on both how to make marriages work and how to make divorce more effective for everybody. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Robin Buckley. She has a PhD in clinical psychology with specialized training in cognitive behavioral therapies and executive coaching. And Dr. Robin really works from a data-driven strategic coaching model to help couples and individuals to achieve personal and professional goals. And today, what she's going to be talking to us is about how to use business procedures to actually create a better divorce process. And Dr. Robin just recently authored a book that has just come out on the bestseller list called Marriage Incorporated. I'm going to highly encourage you to reach out and grab that if you're in a new relationship or if you're in a current relationship that's maybe a little rocky, because she's got some great ideas about how to start making relationships better. Let's tune into this episode that just was recorded a little bit ago, and let's focus in on how to use these practices to more effectively, strategically implement divorce.
So my background, as you said, Marty, is clinical psychology, and I did traditional therapy and all that for years, but what was missing for me was the idea of a proactive, preventative approach, because traditional therapy is more intervention and more in the crisis. And that just didn't align with me professionally or personally. So I simultaneously finished my PhD and got certified as a coach, which back in the day was not even a thing, not even an industry yet. But what I love about it is that when people come into coaching, it's because they have typically at least some goal that they want to achieve. It's not that they're being forced into it or the crisis is so heavy that they feel like they have to do it. And to me, it just makes sense when we start to control our brain's reaction to situations, then we can really tap into strategy and planning so we actually do achieve our goal in our marriage and relationships or in a divorce.
Yeah, and I love that so much. And that's one of the big things I always tell people is the differentiation between therapy and coaching is coaching starts in the present and works towards the future. Right. And therapy kind of starts in the present and works towards the past to help you with the future. So
exactly.
It's a little bit different.
And it makes it to me, I'm sure it works for some people. And I think therapy is so important, but I think coaching can be a great alternative for people who don't want to necessarily focus on the past. I mean, my perspective is usually we can't change the past. We can't do anything about that. But
right.
We certainly can do stuff about the present in order to affect the future.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that, Robin. I think that it's really important for both options to be available. And, for some of my clients, I deal with a lot of people who are in high conflict or abusive relationships. And so the therapy part is really important 100%. For that healing. And that's not really what coaching isn't necessarily on healing at all. It's on moving, right. And having those specific goals. So,
absolutely. I usually screen my coaching clients that if there's any abuse, addiction, infidelity, recent loss, that those are issues that can be addressed in therapy and then come back. And once you're at a point where you feel more secure with the situation, then we can work in coaching.
Yes. And unfortunately for my clients, if they're in the divorce process, the clock is ticking. And yep. So for them, I think sometimes having a divorce coach who's going to be holding that space for them and who they can come to and just, I don't know what the attorney means when they say, get me XY, documents. I don't even know where to find those. To have somebody who can then sit down and, calmly and strategically say, where have you looked? What access do you have? And again, we are coming back to that whole idea of strategy and goals. And it's so powerful when you're moving through difficult times in life. And let's face it, divorce is one of those, is to have that goal focus. So can you talk a little bit about that whole idea of a goal focused divorce? Because when you and I first met and you talked about that, I was like, I'm in there with Dr. Robin. I'm right on her team. So tell me a little bit about that, what that means to you and your clients.
With my clients, as you know, Marty, with your work, divorce is very painful. I've been through divorce. It is one of the hardest things that I've gone through. Never want to repeat that. And so much of it is generated from the part of our brain that protects us, that tries to protect us, which is the amygdala. And it's that fight, flight, or freeze response. And none of those are helpful in either planning your marriage or in a divorce. Fight, flight, or freeze is a reactive, defensive perspective, and that shuts down the logical part of your brain, the part that can think things through strategically, that can create plans, that can do the emotional regulation. And both of those parts of your brain don't function at the same time. So if your amygdala is firing, your prefrontal cortex, that logic center, shuts down. And thankfully, the opposite is true. If you can get your prefrontal cortex engaged, it shuts down the amygdala, which is when people can really look at emotionally charged situations and still retain logic and still retain the focus on a goal. So, with so much in our life, we have goals, whether it's about our physical health, whether it's about our mental health, whether it's about our careers, our children. We have some clear ideas of where we want to get to. But for many, many people, they get married and they never articulate their goal other than we want to be together forever. I'm like, that is so vague. That is so vague. How are you going to do that? And the same is true in divorce. Well, we're going to get divorced. Okay, but what's the goal in the divorce? The goal in the divorce is not to end the marriage. It's how you're going to end the marriage. What is that going to look like so that it creates whatever comes on the other side, whether it creates a co-parenting situation that's effective, whether you end up as still being amicable and able to have a friendship, or whether it's complete separation, which is a fine goal to have. But do you want to do it by, in the process, creating trauma and financial debt and just that upheaval that is typically associated with traditional divorces?
And the key that you hit on is, I think any of those three options can be perfectly reasonable. Nobody, at least nobody that I know, advocates for somebody to stay best friends or even, amicable with a highly toxic person.
Yeah.
And especially if there's no kids involved, there's no reason to keep those people in your life. But if you have kids, and if they're not one of those outlying, stressful, high conflict people, then it's in your best interest, and it's in your kids' best interest to maintain that civility and that ability to, sit together and celebrate maybe a birthday or a graduation or a wedding or the birth of a grandchild. You don't want your kids picking one or the other of you to be at those events, because I know if they've got both of you there together, it's going to be a catastrophe. So,
and I have had couples, who didn't have children, and I've worked with them where they say, we started as friends, we got married, it didn't work, but we still like our friendship. We worked better as friends.
Yes.
And so they wanted to retain, because there was no toxicity, there was no abuse, they just didn't mesh the way they thought they would. And so their goal is to end up, we still want to be friends. And if you don't have a plan for your divorce, there's a lot of other things that can come into the divorce process that will tear apart that friendship. So exactly, it's whatever your goal is. The goal is not to get, I know that seems like the overriding goal, and people will tell me that, well, our goal is to get divorced. I'm like, nah, but what's the real goal? What do you want after the divorce is finalized? That's the goal. And that's how you really want to engage that logic center of your brain so that you get to that. Because the lawyers or the mediators will help you get to the divorce. But what do you really want the outcome to be?
Yes. And again, so insightful that I recently said this to somebody. The only people that see, well, actually, I think I wrote it on a LinkedIn post, but anyhow, the only people that see divorce as a business, a dissolution of a business, you hear that all the time. Well, divorce is really just the same as dissolving a partnership in a business. It's not, because there's a lot more emotional connection, and there's that sense of loss of what was promised, and I blame this on the way people get married, because you take a vow, you take an oath, right? Till death us do part. I think that's crap. We should not be saying that. We should be saying this. We'll check back in again 5 years and see how this is going.
Yeah. And I agree with part of what you said. I actually do look at divorce as very similar to a dissolution of a business, because in the work that I do really work hard to help couples or individuals have a unique space for their emotions. And it isn't in the conversations around the divorce. I mean, to me, when you're going through a divorce, your emotions are yours to manage individually. You're no longer with that person. They're not your partner. They're not the person that you're going to go to lean on. But we forget that sometimes because it's a habit. I mean, I watched a recent couple, and the husband kept leaning on the wife, and the wife's like, "We're getting divorced. I'm not here to take care of you anymore."
Yes.
He could not separate that. And that actually created more of the upheaval.
Right.
So it's helping couples maintain the perspective of how would we dissolve a business, and the business is our marriage or relationship, but yet have a place where I can manage my emotions or experience my emotions safely, that doesn't then impinge upon the process of ending the relationship.
And I completely agree with you on that, because that whole idea of the business thing, that's a model that, I mean, the attorneys talk about that. You're going to hear mediators talk about that. But for people that are sitting on opposite sides of the table, where there's already this anger, there's lack of emotional regulation on one or both sides of the table, that's just not feasible for them unless they have somebody strategically working with them, which is where you come in. Yeah. So how do you start your clients? Because I'm sure they come into you, right? They're angry, or they're frustrated, or they're worried about the potential for conflict and escalation and long drawn out legal things and all kinds of stuff that people worry about very legitimately. How do you get people to switch from that emotional triggering all the time to actually being strategic and creating those goals, and even talking about what do you want this relationship with your soon to be ex to look like on the other side of this process?
So it starts in my work, the same way I start with couples who are coming in just to improve their relationships or their marriage. And I have them actually create a mission statement. So in this case, it's what's your mission statement for the divorce? And usually if they're not familiar with my model, I get looked at like I'm nuts. And they say, what are you talking about? I'm like, how do you want this to go? If this was a business, what would be your mission, your ultimate goal for this process? And it takes a while because they're not used to talking with each other in agreement. So we work on, okay, but what would it look like? That's usually where I start for each of them. What would it look like? A year after the divorce is over, what would it look like? And whether it's we completely don't talk to each other anymore, whatever it might be. And then I help them frame a mission statement around that. And that becomes a dynamic tool that we go back to when they're struggling, particularly when they're struggling. So any conversation, any behavior, any decision, does it support the mission statement that the two of you created to achieve your goal in the ultimate end result of the divorce? So it becomes something that when emotions start to escalate, when one person is trying to maybe go after something that is more out of ego rather than out of a realistic perspective, we go back to the mission statement. Does this support the mission statement? And it certainly can be, if that happens over and over, do we need to revise the mission statement? Is it not exactly what we're looking for now? But it becomes almost that compass of where are we going? And does everything you're doing, saying, thinking about support that mission statement? I usually encourage couples to have a copy of that mission statement with them, whether it's on their phone or posted on their laptops, so that they can refer to it, just like you do in business. You refer to that mission statement to say, okay, where are we actually aligned? Because as you and I both know, Marty, divorce just divides people. And I
Right.
get why, again, been there. But in those situations, it's trying to get them to unify around a shared direction, a shared mission, because that's what will keep some of that emotional reactivity lower.
And I'm guessing, thank you for that. That's a really great explanation. And I think it's a great exercise, especially
Hmm.
for couples that are fairly amicable, where you're not dealing with a difficult person, or even if you are dealing with a difficult person, but a difficult person who's willing to work with you is one thing. And I think that a lot of times, well, I'm guessing, and I may be wrong, but I'm guessing a lot of times those mission statements focus on the health and well-being of their children, if there's kids involved.
It could, yes, certainly if it's the kids, then yes, I very often see that framed. But again, even if it's, we want to get through this as quickly as possible, as respectfully as possible, and with the end result of us both leading individual lives. That, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was a mission statement that a couple used. They didn't like each other anymore. They were angry with each other for various reasons, but they didn't want it dragged out through the course. They didn't want it to go on for years because of the emotional and financial toll. They just wanted to be done as
Right.
quickly as possible and as again, amicably as possible. So they weren't saying they were coming out as best friends. They weren't saying like we want to be nice to each other. They just wanted it over. And that became built into their mission statement. And that's great and fine. Again, my goal is not to like have everybody doing a kumbaya dance after they're divorced. It's how do you want it to look? How do you want what do you want this experience to be while you're going through something that is very challenging? Even when it's in agreement and mutual and all that, it's still hard.
Yeah.
So how do you want this to really go forward?
And when people are doing this mission statement, do you
Mhm.
find that they're typically at the early part of their divorce, or do they come to you, say, once they thought it was going to be amicable and it starts going south, because that can happen really quickly? Somebody says something that is triggers somebody else, and that's all it takes, right? It just starts that cycle. So where do people typically come into you at what point in the divorce process?
I've worked with both, where some are coming in a very proactive way. Very often, those are clients that worked with me in their marriage, and unfortunately, the strategies just didn't work for them because there were other issues that just could not be resolved.
Right.
And so they want that proactive approach to their divorce. But I've also worked with couples. Some divorce attorneys have sent them my way saying, look, this is getting just out of hand, or, we know some divorce attorneys are really the opposite of the stereotype, and
Yes,
they actually
yes.
don't want it to be acrimonious. So they say, why don't you go start with Dr. Robin, and then let's come back to the table after you do some work with her. So it really comes down to whether a couple is willing to make a divorce effective rather than personal. And if they can choose that we want this to be as effective as possible, those are the couples that this model works with really, really well.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you a question that may be putting you a little bit on the spot, Dr. Robbins. So if you don't want to answer, don't
Oh,
worry.
please.
Just say I'm going to pass on that one. I recently interviewed a therapist who is she works with couples in high conflict divorce situations to try to create some sort of managed separation to at least get them out of that environment and to be able to calm down and maybe think through some things. And of course, she works with them on all kinds of other things at the same time. But one of the things that she said is that traditional therapy for couples that are already at the point where it's like, we're going to therapy, you either change or we're getting a divorce, has like one of the highest failure rates of any kind of
Great.
intervention. Is
100%.
that accurate?
Absolutely. That's why I stopped doing couples therapy. Because it just, most of the time, again, people are coming into couples therapy as a last resort and as an intervention. And at that point, one or both has already made the decision that this is over. And they're checking the boxes to know that they've done everything possible, even though they're not fully engaged. And I will be incredibly candid and transparent. That was me in my divorce, that I knew it was over. It had probably been over a year for me
Right. Right.
before the conversations were actually finally heard by my significant other. And I just was going through the motions knowing, okay, then I can walk away knowing that we quote unquote tried everything.
Right.
So that, yeah, that's therapy. I think couples therapy works really well almost when it's used as a couples coaching model where people are like, you know what, things just aren't feeling good and we're not where we want to be. So we want to take that preventative measure. But I don't think a lot of people see couples therapy that way. They think of it when things are really bad because life keeps rolling and then they don't realize how bad it is. And now they're going for therapy and that's
Yeah.
hard.
That was an information packed 18 minutes, wasn't it? And you can see why I value Dr. Robin and her insight so much, because she really has a very structured, very practical approach that is, really, I think it takes the best of a coaching model and brings it into divorce strategy and divorce strategic planning. So there's three important points that I would like to just highlight. Number one is Dr. Robin really clearly indicated the difference between coaching and therapy. And I think that is something that we need to be aware of. We did explore why couples therapy often doesn't work because people wait too long to actually get to therapy. And it may be because one person doesn't want to go. It may be because both people don't want to admit there's a problem that's bigger than they can handle. And I get that. I think that was probably an issue I know that was an issue in my divorce. And it's something that, at that time, 30 years ago, couples counseling wasn't really that well utilized. But even now, the takeaway I got from the conversation with Dr. Robin is don't wait until we're on the verge of, fix yourself or I'm leaving. Because when you put that kind of pressure on the relationship, what a therapist is going to be able to do is going to be minimal. We really need to start looking at this counseling therapeutic work much earlier when the relationship starts to have challenges. Number two, I think the one really interesting thing is the idea of strategy and goal setting in divorce as a way to make sure we both walk out of this with what we want and that we have an exit plan. And having that exit plan, reducing that conflict through a coaching process can be highly effective for setting the couple up to have a good relationship post-divorce. Now, does that matter? It depends, right? So if you are working with somebody and you've got kids and you're going through a divorce, wouldn't you rather work with somebody that you can talk to, be friends with, and there's relatively low conflict? That's going to set up the co-parenting relationship nicely. And even if you don't have children, there once was that loving relationship. So if that is worthwhile salvaging on some level, not in a intimate partner way, but in a person who cares for somebody else way, reducing that conflict and being able to walk out. And if you see each other coming down the street, you don't turn around and walk the other way because you can't stand seeing that person. Again, that may or may not be a consideration or a concern for you in your divorce. And the third point that I'd like to just kind of hammer in a little bit is that whole idea of emotional regulation and how that helps us with decision making. I cannot stress that when people are going through divorce, there are so many decisions to make, and they are not all legal decisions. So a lot of these are not going to be addressed by the law. The law doesn't care who gets the wedding gifts, or it doesn't deal with the minutia of the separation of disengaging from years or decades of living together. So there's all these decisions that have to be made. And then there's the real critical ones during the divorce. And I think Dr. Robin really highlighted that whole idea of when we get stuck and when we're not able to emotionally regulate, we get into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And then we don't make logical decisions, or we don't want to make any decisions at all, which can add to conflict, but it also adds to the time and the cost of the divorce. So I think there's a lot of things to think about in this. Her book, Marriage Incorporated, is definitely worth the read. I've got it. I've read through it. I think it is phenomenal. I think it's a great gift if you know somebody that's starting out a relationship, but I think it's also a good thing for people to read if they're in a relationship or if they're single and are interested in getting into a relationship, because it gives you a nice framework to how to start having those conversations with a new partner or a potential new partner in life. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know it was one of the fun ones that I got to have with somebody. And yeah, definitely check out Dr. Robin's book and let me know what you think. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself because you